Israel strikes dozens of military sites in Iran, including nuclear-linked facility. Iran rules out talks with Israel or the United States while strikes continue and asserts right to self-defense. And at least 42 Palestinians killed by Israeli gunfire across Gaza. Hello, good afternoon and welcome to Q News. I'm Mark Summers. Germany says Iran will likely feature in next week's NATO summit, but declined to comment on potential US involvement in Israeli strikes. German government spokesperson Stefan Cornelius confirmed that Iran is expected to be on the agenda at the upcoming NATO summit. His remarks followed US President Donald Trump's statement that he would decide within 2 weeks whether to join Israeli military operations. Berlin refused to speculate on any Allied attack plans, underscoring the sensitivity of the issue within the alliance as tensions in the Middle East continue to escalate. Israel says it struck dozens of military sites in Iran overnight, including a facility linked to Tehran's nuclear weapons program. The Israeli military confirmed it carried out coordinated strikes across Iran, targeting installations it claims are tied to nuclear weapons development, including the Organization of Defensive Innovation and Research. The military spokesperson, Brigadier General Effie Defrin, said Israel is prepared to expand its operations until all objectives are achieved. The latest wave of strikes marks a sharp escalation in the conflict and comes amid growing international alarm over the risk of broader regional war. French President Emmanuel Macron has condemned attacks on civilian nuclear facilities and energy infrastructure amid the Iran-Israel conflict. Macron called for an immediate end to strikes targeting civilian infrastructure, warning there is no justification for endangering nuclear sites or civilian populations. The French president also urged Iran to return to the negotiating table over its nuclear program, as fears mount of a broader regional escalation. France continues to press for diplomatic solutions to prevent further instability. Iran says it will not enter talks with Israel or the United States while strikes continue, asserting its right to self-defense. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi confirmed Tehran will not negotiate under fire, declaring that Iran's military response will continue as long as Israeli attacks persist. Araghchi also ruled out any contact with the United States, accusing Washington of complicity in the current escalation. The remarks underscore growing tensions as diplomatic channels between key players in the conflict remain frozen. Iranian missile struck southern Israel, sparking fires in Be'er Sheva and damaging buildings and vehicles. A missile launched by Iran hit Be'er Sheva overnight, setting fire to several parked cars and damaging a nearby residential building. CNN reported a fire broke out near the Microsoft building following the impact. Footage shared online showed flames engulfing vehicles and debris scattered at the strike site. Additional missile strikes were reported in Nevatim and Rahat as tensions between Iran and Israel continue to escalate. Emergency crews have been deployed to contain the damage. Israel's defense minister has issued a warning to Hezbollah, threatening to have a full-scale military action if the group joins the war. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz directly warned Hezbollah's deputy chief, Naim Qassem, saying Israel would respond with overwhelming force if the group intervenes in the conflict with Iran. Katz declared that Israel's patience with what it calls terrorist threats has run out and vowed Hezbollah would be completely eliminated in any confrontation. The statement raises fears of a wider regional escalation as tensions across the Lebanon-Israel border remain high. Russia has warned that the U.S. Russia has warned that the U.S. I'll start that again. Russia has warned the U.S. that using nuclear weapons against Iran would be catastrophic, following reports of Pentagon planning. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said any potential use of nuclear weapons in Iran would mark a dangerous and irreversible escalation. His remarks came after The Guardian revealed Pentagon assessments suggesting a tactical nuclear strike might be needed to destroy Iran's Fordo facility if conventional means fail. Moscow said such a move would destabilize the global security order and must be avoided at all costs. Global shipping giant Maersk has suspended all vessel calls to Israel's Haifa port, citing safety concerns amid the Iran-Israel conflict. Maersk announced it will temporarily halt all its ship operations to Haifa port due to heightened security risks linked to the ongoing conflict between Israel and Iran. The Danish company said the decision prioritizes crew safety and reflects growing concerns over maritime threats in the region. The suspension underscores the wider impact of the regional escalation on international trade routes and supply chains. Iran has said that it has arrested a suspected Mossad agent accused of leaking military site data to Israel. State media in Iran reported the arrest of an individual accused of transmitting sensitive information on air defense installations to Israeli intelligence via WhatsApp. Authorities allege the suspect gathered data on strategic military and radar sites, calling the act a direct threat to national security. The arrest comes amid heightened tensions following weeks of strikes between Iran and Israel. Investigations are ongoing. Saudi Arabia has warned that any military attack on civilian nuclear sites violates international law and UN principles. Saudi Arabia's Nuclear and Radiological Regulatory Authority stated that armed attacks on peaceful nuclear facilities breach international law, UN Charter principles, and the IAEA statute. The statement follows growing regional concern over strikes near Iran's Bushehr nuclear plant. Riyadh reiterated its call to respect international agreements and protect civilian infrastructure amid the escalating military confrontations in the region. And now, for analysis on the situation, we go across to Salma Marwan in our newsroom. Salma.
Thank you, Mark. And for further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by the international relations expert, Dr. Muhammad Osman. Dr. Osman, pleasure to have you as always. And let me first start by asking you, how likely is NATO to adopt a unified position on Iran amid the divergent member views, especially with the United States considering joining Israeli strikes?
Thank you for having me, Salma. It seems, of course, that the conflict between Israel and Iran is rapidly escalating, and today is the first attempt to diplomatically tackle this issue, to attempt to find a peaceful solution to this rapidly deteriorating crisis. Today in Geneva, foreign ministers of Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, the E3 group of the European powers, are supposed to meet with Abbas Araqji, the Iranian Minister of Foreign Affairs. And it is expected that the nuclear program of Iran will be the center of discussions and negotiations, as well as Iran's relations and funding of its regional proxies, and both issues seem to be the central cause behind this war, or what Israel is taking as a pretext to launch this war in Israel. even though the convening of the negotiations in Geneva is a positive sign, yet we are far from any plausible framework or workable framework for the return to negotiations. And it is inconceivable that these negotiations will continue amid continued Israeli airstrikes and aggression against Iran. And this is the stance, the seemingly immovable stance of the Iranians. They refuse to negotiate with the United States under fire. And it's very notable today that Abbas Araqji said that he will not, that Iran will not officially communicate with the United States at the moment, and that this stance will not change, and that they will not even consider negotiating with the United States directly or indirectly until the Israeli war in Iran stops. So we will have to wait and see what happens today in Geneva, and who knows, maybe we will witness a breakthrough.
Building on what you said, sir, when Abbas Araghchi confirmed that Iran will not negotiate under fire, what impact will this statement have, especially on the United States, especially regarding the fact that Trump is expected to make a decision regarding Iran within 2 weeks?
Seeing how temperamental President Trump is, even on a personal level, when dealing with this issue, among other issues, and seeing that the United States is pushing for a maximalist, absolutist resolution to this conflict that is, as Trump very plainly put it, the unconditional surrender of Iran, which means basically the submission of Iran to all of the U.S. preconditions for a deal and a ceasefire, it seems. At this point, it does not seem that this will bode well with the United States. The United States will most likely reject Iran's stance and will keep encouraging Israel to escalate its acts of aggression against Iran. And maybe even the United States will consider intervening directly in the war in the coming days. We are seeing the United States deploying massive military assets in the region. 3 aircraft carriers, strategic bombers heading to the Diego Garcia base in the Indian Ocean. And it seems also that not only the United States is doing it, the United Kingdom is sending one of its 2 aircraft carriers, the HMS Prince of Wales, to the Middle East, most probably to intervene on the side of the United States if the U.S. decides to intervene on the side of Israel. And Iran, on the other hand, is betting on its ability to pressure Israel, as I see now on your screen. There is another huge missile barrage was launched by the Iranians against the Israelis, around 30 missiles, 3 of them impacted so far, one of them hitting an area adjacent to the port of Haifa. So it seems that both of them are attempting to impose their will and their conditions of negotiations by fire.
But sir, what are the chances of the United States actually intervening, and in what form exactly, especially that sources say that Trump is focused on avoiding a wider conflict when taking his decision?
I think that the chances of U.S. involvement in this war, according to the current variables, unfortunately, is very high. The United States now is giving a final chance to the Iranians for negotiation. This 2-week time bracket that President Trump has proposed as a time frame during which he will decide whether to attack Iran or not, in my opinion, is nothing more than an unveiled ultimatum to the Iranians. And probably the Americans, if they intervene, will probably attack Iran even before those 2 weeks expire, maybe even in the coming days, if it happens, of course. Much will depend on the negotiations that will take place today. If actually the Iranian rhetoric behind closed doors is different than the Iranian rhetoric that they use for public consumption, there might be something, because the United States and Trump is not interested in getting dragged into another war in the Middle East. However, he is adamant that he will end Iran's nuclear ambition, and he is taking his entire presidency now on this. He is going against his own public opinion. He is going against even his own MAGA base in order to take out the Iranian nuclear program and secure Israel's hegemony over the region. And maybe even the U.S. intervention, if it happens, will only be the targeting of the 4-0 nuclear facility and other nuclear facilities. Maybe it will not be a massive intervention, as some people might imagine, that seeks to topple the regime, because the United States is not interested in regime change in Iran. However, Israel is, so we will have to see how that works out in the coming days.
That was the international relations expert, Dr. Muhammad Osman. Thank you so much for joining us here on Q News. And now we go back to Mark in our studio.
Thank you very much, Selma. Selma Marwan there in our studio. Now we are going to go live to Geneva, where Iran's Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, we've been hearing so much about, is addressing the Human Rights Council regarding the latest situation between Iran and Israel. Let's go live there now.
Iran is defending itself against the barbaric attack. We are vital, tasked, and determined to defend our territorial integrity, national sovereignty, and security with all force. It is our inherent right, as also clearly recognized under Article 51 of the Charter. Dear colleagues, the peace and rule of law are at serious stake as a result of Israel's unlawful invasion of Iran. Israel is committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. International humanitarian law are unilaterally
in violation of all the Geneva Conventions. Mr. Chairman, here we say that all protocols and laws agreed upon in Geneva have been violated. And there were some laws for 1995 violated. Dear colleagues, what is happening right now is a blatant violation of the diplomatic efforts and endeavors that took place and started after the negotiations and talks to reach peace. Nevertheless, these strikes broke the negotiations, which is a breach of diplomacy and treachery. It's also a breach of the UN system and the international law. Let me be clear. What happened is the destruction of all the laws agreed upon 20 years ago to preserve human rights, and therefore the international law was handled very poorly, which is a disaster. This war is an aggressive action, and each state must pay attention and take all the necessary precaution to stop this attack and these war crimes that are completely unjustifiable in our region. This is a call from a character that devoted his entire life for peace and for dialogue. We remember the regime of Saddam, and we do not want to repeat this again. Thank you so much, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed presence. Now we will take a short recess before we complete the dialogue regarding protection against violence and discrimination.
There we go. That's Abbas Araghchi, the Foreign Minister of Iran, speaking in Geneva. He talked of violations of the diplomatic attempts and the negotiations. He called what happened treachery. And he called Israel's actions aggressive action, war crimes, and said it is completely unjustifiable, and called for states around the table there in Geneva to do something about it, and says we do not want a repeat of the situation in Iraq. That is Abbas Araghchi, the Foreign Minister of Iran, speaking in Geneva. Now let's get the latest from Gaza. At least 42 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli gunfire across Gaza. That's according to medical sources. Palestinian medical authorities say Israeli forces opened fire in multiple areas of the Gaza Strip, killing 42 people since dawn. The deaths come as Israeli operations continue to target both civilians and humanitarian corridors. The toll is expected to rise as strikes intensify and aid access remains severely restricted. Rescue workers and medical teams are struggling to reach many of the wounded under continued shelling. With less than 20% of Gaza now livable, families are sheltering in bombed-out buildings as space and options run out. In Gaza City, dozens of displaced families are taking refuge inside the ruins of structurally unsound buildings damaged by Israeli airstrikes. With public shelters overwhelmed and streets unsafe, many say they have no alternative but to live amid the rubble. The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees reports at least 39 evacuation orders since March, forcing repeated displacements. As Israeli strikes continue and the humanitarian situation worsens, the already limited living space across the Strip continues to shrink. UNICEF says Gaza is facing a man-made drought as water networks collapse and children risk dying of thirst. The United Nations Children's Fund has warned that only 40% of Gaza's drinking water facilities remain functional, citing widespread infrastructure collapse. The agency says the Strip is now experiencing a man-made drought with water production and access severely limited. Aid groups report increasing numbers of children suffering from dehydration and waterborne diseases, as Israeli strikes and siege conditions prevent repair efforts and block fuel and supply deliveries. Israel says a rocket fired from northern Gaza landed near Be'eri. No injuries or damage. The Israeli army reported that a projectile launched from northern Gaza fell in an open area near the border community of Be'eri. According to military, the rocket did not trigger warning sirens under existing protocol, which exempts alerts for landing in uninhabited zones. The incident comes amid ongoing hostilities and heightened tensions along the Gaza. And that's our bulletin for this hour, but let's recap the main headlines this afternoon. Israel strikes dozens of military sites in Iran, including nuclear-linked facilities. Iran rules out talks with Israel or the United States amid the strikes and asserts right to self-defense. And at least 42 Palestinians killed by Israeli gunfire across Gaza. And that's the Qnews Bulletin for this hour. Don't forget you can follow Qnews at Qnews EGY on our social media platforms. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews. In Depth is next.